I love the phrase, the nervous system evaluates the environment as threatening. In some ways, that sounds like quite a good descriptor for trauma.
Yeah. So I would say the problem with trauma is that we tend to define trauma by event and not by response. So if we were, in a sense, better witnesses of ourselves and others, we would realize that the event changes the probability of the feeling, but the way of predicting is really to see or ask the individual, how did you feel? What happened to your body? In my own research, what we're using, I'm using a term which I call a retuned autonomic nervous system. So people who have survived trauma, the nervous system has literally learned on a single trial that it can't be accessible. So it has to be defensive, because accessibility, trusting another, is really risky once you've been injured. And survivors of trauma will explain that as well. And the survivors of trauma tell you what's really happening, because they tell you that their intentions, their desire in life is to be safe in the arms of another. But when they approach that, but people are getting too close to them, they have to push the relationship away, because the body is now feeling that vulnerability. I like to think of this continuum of a common construct, and that is vulnerability and accessibility. So if accessibility is where you are on this continuum, your arms are open, your ventral side is open, you're giving people hugs. But if vulnerability is where you are, those same behaviors result in rigidity and defensiveness, because your body is no longer accessible. Because if you become accessible and you have this trauma history and a retuned nervous system, that accessibility is a trigger of vulnerability.
So it's the nervous system's evaluation of the event that determines the implications of the trauma.
Yeah, the beauty of this. So I was this morning was watching a series of videos that I have to comment on for a conference, and they were about, it's all about resilience. And one was about literally a person who dove off the Golden Gate Bridge and survived. And when he jumped, he knew he made a mistake, is what he's saying. So it was like, but what he was telling in this interview was that his body had a journey. His mind had a different one. His body said, you have to commit suicide. It's too painful. His mind said, I want to live. And this is this dialogue that people are always going through. And in many times, or many cases, they allow, I got to be very careful in using this term, they allow. Their body takes charge. And part of their therapeutic model is of dealing with this is to be aware and respectful of that bodily drive, but not necessarily act it out. So it's like you become your own Buddhist. You say, I have this feeling, but I don't need a narrative for that feeling. I'm experiencing this. Once I start creating a narrative, I now have to complete it. So it's like saying, I have this visceral feeling. It has a range of uncomfortableness. Let me explore it. You know, so in a sense, you diffuse it by honoring the feeling without labeling it or without what I call giving it meaning. As you give it meaning, it starts literally driving people's lives. I think that's how people who are anxious and who don't really understand what their own anxiety is, they think it's the task that they haven't completed and that has to get done. But complete that task, there'll be something else, because their body needs them to keep moving. Because if they don't move, there's going to be vulnerability. And this is the issue of understanding that adaptive function of the fight-flight system. It keeps you out of shutting down. So if you have a severe trauma history in which your body shut down, high-risk behaviors of mobilization keep you out of it. Doesn't make you social, doesn't make you happy, but it keeps you out of shutting down. So the question is, do I want to live my life as a highly anxious person running around and trying to make meaning out of doing without having meaning through relationship? The answer is most people are really frustrated that they can't get to that next stage. And that next stage is that their bodies have to become accessible, and they have to be a welcome portal to cues of safety, which means they have to understand that it's a different physiological state that enables them to be accessible and engaging.
If what you've heard on Flow Research Collective Radio has been helpful, please consider doing us a solid and leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are listening to this. Reviews help us connect to a wider audience so we can get these peak performance principles out to more people.